Hello and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Olivia Marquis, and I'm part of the event staff here at Politics and Prose, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. For a full list of everything confirmed, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. While we've lifted the mask mandate here in the store, you are encouraged to wear a mask throughout the event, and we can provide one for you if you did not bring one. When we get to the time to opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a standing microphone at the end of the aisle to your right there. Please line up at this mic so everyone can hear your question, as we want that question to be heard in our recording of the event. We are both audio and video recording, as well as live streaming today's program, so that you or anyone you know can soon find it at the Politics and Prose YouTube channel. Following the Q&A, we'll have a signing here up at this table, so if you've not already purchased the book, we have many copies behind our registers at the front of the store. We will ask you to line up starting at the pillar, where the microphone is, and we'll come by to ask your name for personalization, so please have your books ready for us. Once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. So now, without further ado, tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Chris Guillebeau, celebrating the release of Gonzo Capitalism, How to Make Money in an Economy That Hates You. When I think of the term Gonzo Capitalism, I think of the act of making existing systems work for you and taking control of the powerful and sometimes ruthless entity that is capitalism. Tonight, Chris will share what Gonzo Capitalism is and how it is changing the world as we know it. Chris Guillebeau is the New York Times best-selling author of The $100 Startup, Side Hustle, The Happiness of Pursuit, and other books. He is a serial entrepreneur, the host of Side Hustle School podcast, and the founder of the World Domination Summit, an event for cultural creatives that has, for the past decade, attracted thousands of attendees to Portland, Oregon every summer. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Chris Guillebeau.
Awesome. Hello, Washington, D.C. Hey, good to see you all. Thank you so much, Olivia, for that kind introduction. I'm excited to be here. This is something that is both familiar and new at the same time, or I could say I've been doing this for a long time. Like I've had 8 books, been touring for 12 years, lots of meetups and such, but it's also been a long time because it took a few years off, at least in terms of doing events and such. So this is stop number 5 of the Gonzo Capitalism book tour. We are kind of co-creating this experience all together tonight. So that's fun. I've been excited and also nervous in a good way. And last week, kicked off the book tour. Book has been out for just 7 days now. And I got a little reminder of what it was like to be on book tour. So I got to do this morning TV segment with Chicago TV. And if you don't go on book tour very often, or if you don't watch morning TV very often, because who does, here's a little bit of the behind the scenes. So they asked me to do this segment, and it's remote, and like the producer is talking to me in my AirPods, giving me some instructions and such. And then on the screen, I can see the segment that's being played like right before mine. And for morning TV, they have to fill a lot of time. They have to fill like 3 hours a day, which is why they're always desperate to bring on random authors or anybody else. If there hasn't been like a car chase or an air rage viral video, they've just got a lot of time to fill. So right before me, the segment was about wildlife. And it was wildlife that appears to be friendly, but is actually dangerous. And the hosts have to appear to be really interested in this topic. They have lots of banter, So I'm getting these instructions and looking at all these like pictures of snakes and various other animals. And then like right before I go on, it's all about the hippopotamus, which they're like, the hippopotamus looks like he's friendly, but he's actually not. And so the hosts are going back and forth. There's a TikTok video of somebody who's about to pet a hippo. And one of the hosts is like, Robin, I don't think that's going to go well for him. And the other host is like, you're right, Dan, I don't think it is. But coming up, we're going to hear some interesting ideas for making money in the new economy from author Chris Guillebeau. And I was like, okay, I'm back in the game. Like now I remember what this is like, and I feel simultaneously very special and also meaningless, which is probably a good metaphor for life in general, right? Just a good attitude to have, like life is special and also meaningless. But here tonight at Politics and Prose, I only feel special because all of you are here. So thank you so much. Yeah, that's good. Round of applause for yourselves. I like that. That's great. Who have I seen before at a previous book tour event or stop or world domination summit? Raise your hand. Yeah, I love the WDS swag. That's amazing. Who is completely new? Who's your first time here? Okay, nice. Some people didn't raise their hands either way, which is totally cool. We are all about the non-binary. It's all good. So thanks so much, Politics and Prose. I want to say hello to my sister-in-law, Nicole Ledesma Dower, in the back. Thank you, Nicole, for being here. She also brought cupcakes to share, and somebody else did as well. Was that you? What was your name?
Kathy.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate that. So afterwards, we'll have a time to share there. Let's see if this works. Next test, it does. Great. So here's what I'd propose for this co-created concept. I have a little presentation. It's about 25 minutes are about me. The rest is all stories and ideas, hopefully something that you can use. And my goal for this experience is that every person here tonight will experience something fun, something you learn, and something you can do. So something you can apply right away in a practical sense. Afterwards, we'll do some question and answer. That's always a great part. Politics and Prose may have some instructions about that, as mentioned with the microphone. And then, most important of all, I do encourage you to meet somebody here before the night is over, just because I have learned, after doing this many times, the best part of the experience really is everybody else who shows up. So even if you are introverted or highly sensitive or neurodivergent, I'm all of those things. So if I can do it, you can too. That's my proposal. And to kick things off, you might notice I like to ask questions. This is my favorite question. This is my favorite question of all time. It's a one-word question. And if you go through life asking this question, you will notice a couple things. You will notice that not everyone likes this question. Not everyone likes to be asked, like, why are we doing it this way? Like, what's the point of this, right? Not everyone likes to be asked this question, but you will be much more informed. And if you want to practice this question, you don't even have to ask it of anyone else. You can start just by asking it of yourself. So tomorrow when you go to work or whatever it is you do tomorrow, you can just ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? What is the point of this? Am I just exchanging my time for money? If so, that's okay, like we need money. But might there be some greater reason, some deeper purpose, something else? Why do I spend my free time the way that I do? Why do I invest in the relationships that I choose to invest in? Why am I here tonight? And I really think if you just start asking this question, even without doing anything else, like without having a plan of attack, without trying to make like a lot of big changes in your life, I just think naturally you're going to make some positive changes. So I like to ask why. And if you want to write a book, it's really important to know why the book, right? Who else has written a book here? I'm sure we have some other authors here. Yes. What was your most recent book? Super Conscious Leadership. I love that. Anybody else? Okay. Now watch this. Who wants to write a book at some point? Right. Okay. A lot of people want to write a book. So what was your name? Author of Super Conscious Leadership? Jessica Jake. Okay. So everybody who wants to write a book, afterwards you should talk to her and get her advice. Okay. But if you want my quick advice, the most important thing, like the starting point, is to have a good answer to that question, to the why question, because there's a lot of things you could write, right? There's a lot of books you could write. So why this one? I'm going to tell you why Gonzo Capitalism. But for me, this is the why behind all the things I do. To communicate this message, you don't have to live your life the way other people expect. There are alternatives. There is another way. There are all kinds of people that have expectations for you or preferences for you or things that they would like you to do or to be or to become. And that's fine. And there are all alternatives. There are other ways. Doesn't mean that every alternative is always better than every conventional way. It just means that these alternatives exist, right? So if we haven't met before, I learned pretty long time ago, pretty much when I was a teenager, that I wasn't very good at working for other people. And I really do have ADD, like actual diagnosed ADD. I would ask who else has ADD here, but number one, that's kind of personal, and number two, everyone has ADD now. Like after the pandemic, I feel like it's like, who doesn't, right? But I had to figure out, I was really motivated to do something I was excited about, but if I wasn't motivated, I wasn't very good at it. So I had to kind of find a way to make my own way. I was an aid worker for several years in West Africa. I lived in Sierra Leone and Liberia, started traveling a lot out of that experience. And then I started a blog called The Art of Nonconformity, which was chronicling my journey to every country in the world. That started in 2008, did that. That turned into a series of books, conferences, a daily podcast, which I've been doing every day for 6 years. Today is 2,434, I think. And the only secret there is it's harder to quit than it is to keep going. So for me, it would be much more difficult to do the podcast like 2 or 3 days a week, but I have to do it every day, so it gets done, right? And I think it's really like, it's a thing where you can kind of build up a streak like this in your life. I didn't plan to do it for 2,400 days, it just kind of happened. Also, aspiring cat artist, we might come back to that in a moment. And I really like writing books. So for me, books are not an accessory. It's not like a marketing tool. It's not like the book is there to sell a coaching program or something else. Like I really believe in the value of books, even in a digital world. I love digital stuff too. But people are always asking about AI and stuff. It's a question that's coming up a lot. And I always think, well, you know, that's fine. That's great. We can talk about that. But I'm really interested in humanity and gathering people together. And this is something like what we're doing tonight, you know, can't be replicated with AI. So I write books. And because I have so much experience and great foresight, I decided to launch my last book in April 2020. I thought that would be a great time to launch a book and go on a book tour to 40 cities, which actually turned out to be 0 cities. I kind of downsized, you know, 40 to just 0. I was really excited about it. I had a talk just for that book. It was a great talk, just imagine it. But here we are now, fast forward, new book, new talk, Gonzo Capitalism. And the why of this book, in one sentence, this is a book about power and money. It's about how the dynamics of power and the perception of money have really shifted a lot in recent years. I believe in permanent or at least major ways. And I wanted to understand that story. I wanted to tell that story. If we think about money and work, the employer-employee contract in lots of ways, broadly speaking, has been renegotiated and continues to be. We had movements like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, lots more interest in unions. I have a chapter in the book about the overemployed movement, which if you're not familiar with this, it's essentially remote working employees who are working multiple jobs full-time without either employer knowing about it. So these are not low-paid workers. These are highly paid professionals who have found a way to kind of make this work for themselves. Lots more we could say about power. I'll say more about that in a moment. With money, we've seen the rise of digital currencies. We had $1 trillion of stimulus money. We had prisoners starting like stock trading groups. A lot of people were just asking like, what really is money? You know, a lot of people were like, what actually is money? If I decide something is worth something and you decide it's worth something, then have we just essentially created money? And if so, how is that similar or different from how our understanding has been? And so I wanted to tell the story not so much from a societal top-down perspective. There's a little bit of that, maybe 20%, but I am much more interested in individuals. So my work is not for companies, it's not for governments or even large groups of people. I'm interested in how, like the average person, what do they do in this time of great change? We have so much change, the shift in power, the shift in money, the shift in so much else. What does an average person do? How can they capitalize in the age of Gonzo capitalism? How can they apply it in their own way? You know, one, to make more money, but also to have a more meaningful life and to do what's more purposeful and important to them. So a few of the ideas from the book. The notion of peak marketplace. Everything is for sale. Like every time, every talent, every resource, every skill, knowledge set, all kinds of things are for sale. So I like to kind of teach through storytelling. This is Kat Norton. Her name is Miss Excel also. She has built a multi-million-dollar business selling courses on using Microsoft Excel and other spreadsheet tools. And her lead generation tool consists entirely of dance videos on TikTok. So she's dancing on TikTok. There's a little spreadsheet tip or tutorial in the background. She's built a massive follower base, all in a pretty brief period of time. And so she uses that to then sell these online courses for hundreds of dollars each, over and over and over. When I wrote about her in the book, she had just had her first $100,000 day. So another thing that's different in this, this new age, people say, well, how is it different than 5 years ago, 10 years ago? It's the scale of it, the scale and the pace of how people are able to do these kinds of projects. It just happens so much more quickly because of streaming platforms. This is a guy named Jakey. He's from Australia. He is the first ever sleepfluencer. So I'll just say that again. He's a sleepfluencer. He gets paid not really to sleep, but actually to stay awake. So he has a very popular channel. He is kind of like using various technological tools. He has rigged up this bedroom where people are watching him sleep, quote unquote, for 8 hours a night, and they can purchase various items to disrupt his sleep. So sirens and flashing lights and all kinds of various disruptions, songs, and so on. And hundreds of thousands of people are watching this, collective experiment. So he's doing it, as I said, 8 hours a night. It's a job, right? He can sleep during the day, and Jakey's making about $50,000 a month doing this. So whenever I share this story, people are like, is he going to be doing this for the rest of his life? And I'm like, probably not, but it doesn't matter. He's doing it now. It's an experiment. It's really paid off. He's built this profile. He'll always have this story. And he'll probably have a lot of his followers for whatever it is he decides to do next. Another thing that's different is decentralization. So this is a story of Alex. He's from France. He was just a young guy who wanted to move to San Francisco and start his own company, and he wanted $20,000 in funding. So if you want funding, historically, you would go to the bank or some other institution, or maybe you would pursue venture capital through something like Shark Tank, but that's a very long process as well, right? So there's a lot of gatekeepers and institutions even behind the more informal process. So he just kind of gave a talk at like a TEDx-like event, basically said, I'm looking for $20,000. In exchange, I'll give a portion of my earnings, for the next 3 years. And that's how he found his funding. So more and more people are doing this. There are some platforms that enable this, just direct funding for your idea. And sometimes it's just direct funding for a skill that you have, or you don't even have to have it that defined at this point. So like a direct connection between the investor class and those seeking investment. Decentralization. So as mentioned, it's an age in which everything is for sale. I like to highlight some lesser known examples or things that people don't usually think about or hear of, and then just kind of like break it down a little bit and say, well, how can this be possible? And what are the factors behind it? How could someone either replicate this idea or, perhaps more importantly, use a skill that they have and find a way to apply that skill in this new economy? Okay, so let's talk about power and also the intersection of power and money. One of my favorite stories in the book, this is a story called DIY Reparations. And this came about when a black woman in Vermont was kind of looking around as the Black Lives Matter movement was gaining momentum after the murder of George Floyd. And she was looking around and said, okay, well, Vermont is actually the whitest state in the country. And it's good that a lot of young people here, are becoming more politically active and going to marches and so on. But what we really need is some wealth redistribution. And this is not going to be forthcoming, from the government anytime soon. So what if we did it ourselves? And so using tools like Google Docs and Venmo, she basically created this whole voluntary system where people could kind of sign up and choose to send money to the descendants of former slaves. And over the course of just a few days, hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth transfers took place. So here you can see the power, the money, the decentralization, because it happens just very quickly without gatekeepers, without much publicity at all. And of course, it raises all kinds of issues as well. But that's the age of Gonzo Capitalism. Another thing is capitalism itself. A lot of people thinking very differently about it. So I asked some of my readers at one point, because I was just noticing, in the conversation, a lot of people are kind of opposed to capitalism or looking at alternatives and such. So I just surveyed my readers and I said, what does capitalism mean to you? In a sentence. And some people would say, well, it's just a system, a marketplace. It allows me to start a small business or to buy and sell or something. But as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of people have very strong emotional reactions to it. And a lot of people point immediately to wealth inequality, to banks, to a broken system, to a system that oppresses poor people, a scam for the rich to get richer. And I really wanted to understand this because I was like, okay, well, I have a podcast called Side Hustle School, which is essentially about helping people make money in different ways. A lot of my books are encouraging people to go into entrepreneurship, at least at a micro entrepreneurship level and such. But what I really kind of came to believe is it's possible to believe both things. Essentially, it's possible to be critical of a system and have concerns, and then also want to do something for yourself, right? Want to take advantage for yourself. And just as a little small example of this. Of how things have changed in the past 10 years or so. I think even 10 years ago, for a lot of celebrities and athletes and musicians, they often had to be very careful about the perception of selling out, quote unquote, selling out. If you took certain brand money or certain sponsorship, it was something you had to be really kind of hyper aware of. Whereas now, I think for a lot of people, this is actually the goal, the stated goal. And so when I started doing my podcast, I was a little bit nervous about it because I had never done any kind of advertising, no corporate partnerships, nothing like that. And when you go into the podcast world, that's kind of the business model. It's like, okay, you produce the content for free, there's an ad, listeners kind of understand that. And so I was worried about it. In the first year I was doing ads, I almost apologized for the ads. Be like, hey, everybody, just so you know, there's an ad here, but you can just, you can skip ahead, right? And I noticed that I was the only one who was really worried about it. Like nobody actually cared. And I got very little backlash, if any at all, from it. And in fact, on my first book tour, after I had the podcast, I had somebody stand up, during one of the Q&As and thank me for the sponsors. They're like, I want to thank you for introducing me to this sponsor because I'm using them in my business now and it's very helpful. And I was like, I did not expect that at all, right? I did not expect that people kind of understand that sort of arrangement or agreement. So, practical tips. Let's talk about a few things that you can do, then we'll talk about whatever's on your mind. So first things first, actively experiment. This book took me a long time to write. It took me the better part of more than 2 years, actually, to write, in large part because I am not an academic researcher. I am a participant, and I kind of get into stuff. And I don't want to just understand something well enough to write about it. I actually kind of, get sidetracked sometimes myself doing things. So I did a lot of experiments throughout this book. A number of the chapters in the book are kind of, here's the experiment, here's what I learned. If you're interested in it, here's what you can do, and so on. One of the things I got into was prediction markets. There's a whole chapter about this. So you probably are aware of the stock market. You're aware of betting on sports. But now you can bet on all sorts of things with real money, including the outcome of political events or political elections. So I got into that. I bet on Britney Spears' conservatorship case. I bet on TSA security lines, like how many people are going to go through TSA tomorrow. Drake's next album, how many streams is he going to have in the first week or so, right? There's all kinds of markets for this. And some people are earning $50,000 a year part-time just by kind of learning how this works and doing the arbitrage thing. So I did that for a while. Then I also played a lot of video games. Long time ago in my 20s, I was a pretty avid gamer, kind of stopped gaming for a while, got back into it during the pandemic, as one does. And then I discovered not just video gaming, but GameFi, also known as play to earn. So GameFi is like gaming and finance. All of these video games where people are using real money to acquire various in-game assets and then improve those assets and then either sell the assets or there's some function of earning from the assets. One of the games I got into is called Chicken, CHIKN, chicken.farm. So I bought 102 virtual roosters and spent a lot of time every day sending my virtual roosters out to do rooster things. And they upgrade themselves and they get bigger and then they produce more feed. And then you can sell the feed or you can buy chickens to accompany the roosters. You can, upgrade your farmland. There's a whole marketplace. As I said, I spent a lot of time doing these things. In fact, the chapter in the book, the longest chapter in the book is the chapter about gaming, and my editor made me cut it down a bit because she was like, "This is not a whole book about video games, Chris." I'm like, "I know, but if you like gaming, that's there for you. If not, you can skip it." I got into making AI art, just like probably some folks here. Fun story that I can tell because my dad is not here. I had an advanced copy of the book like a month or two ago, and I showed it to my dad, and I was like, "Dad, really excited because this picture is in the book on page 116, I think." And I was like, "Dad, I've always wanted to have my art, in one of my books, and look, I finally made it." And he was really impressed, I think too impressed. Like, I don't think he understood the whole AI thing. And I kept explaining, like, I didn't actually paint this, just so you know. Like, I was just having fun, like cat, drinking a milkshake, and then it just, appears. But I'm still not sure he really knows. So the next time I go home, I'm expecting to see it like on the refrigerator or something. And then because I like to do some random things from time to time, I had learned about the world of premium mattress companies, which if you ever listen to any podcast, probably, you've heard some mattress ads. There are like seemingly unlimited number of these companies, actually several dozen of them, but there's only a few manufacturers. So most of these companies are just kind of private labeling. They're just marketing companies, basically. And they're spending lots of money to acquire customers. And one of the ways they do that, in addition to advertising on podcasts, is they offer a free trial of usually 100 nights or more. In some cases, it's a whole year. And so I knew some of that, but for a while I was thinking, well, who returns a mattress? Because that's a lot of trouble, right? But then I learned that they will actually, send someone to your house to pick up the mattress. There's no charge for that. Like, everything is refunded, the taxes, the shipping, everything, 100%. And best of all, the mattress that they pick up is then donated to a local shelter. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, because there are so many of these companies, I wonder if it's possible to just kind of keep getting, free mattresses over and over. So I'm on my 4th mattress now. Yep. I got the first one and enjoyed it for 99 nights. And then it just wasn't perfect, so someone came and took it. And then I've repeated this now 4 times, partly in the name of research, but also just because it's fun. So if you ever want to enjoy a premium mattress without paying for it and just keep doing it, there's a whole sidebar in the book that will tell you how to do that, and many other things as well. So as I said, I like to share kind of like wacky stories or things that are a little bit lesser known, but I think it's really important to point out that even in the age of Gonzo Capitalism, most successful stories, they still kind of relate to some pretty simple, timeless business lessons. So I've been saying for a long time, like, something I think is really important is everyone needs more than one source of income. It doesn't mean that everybody should be an entrepreneur. I think there's lots of ways to live a purposeful life, of course. But I do think it's important to learn to think entrepreneurially. And you can do that in a traditional career. You can do that in a hybrid model. You can do that in lots of different ways. So I want to encourage everybody to develop these skills, which can then be applied in lots of ways. Somebody the other night asked me about some of the examples. They're like, well, how long will these examples last? Like, will this person be able to have a sustainable income? And I said, well, in some cases, they'll last for a long time. They'll last longer than we think. But even if they don't, what you are building through this process is a skill. You're building a skill that can be applied, to the next thing. So if you practice this, if you actively experiment, if you try to do something, maybe it will last a long time, maybe it won't, but it's not going to hurt you for sure. Which brings me to my next point, which is that you should pursue asymmetrical risks. And what I mean by this is, throughout life, you're always taking risks, especially when you try something new, when you try a new idea. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? No guarantee that it's going to work. But if you can consistently try things that have a high payoff and a low downside, then over time, some of those things are going to work out. So starting a side hustle is the ultimate asymmetrical risk. If you listen to the podcast, we have stories of people that are making 6-figure income, sometimes multiple 6 figures, sometimes more. And obviously lots of stories where it doesn't work out, but they're usually not spending very much money. They're not spending very much money. They're not spending a ton of time. You're testing a concept. That's an asymmetrical risk. Writing a book, for everybody who wants to write a book, this is an asymmetrical risk. Choosing who we get closer to in relationships. Like, life is full of opportunities like these, and I think if you choose to embrace them, it's kind of like asking why. You're just going to get better without doing anything else. So if we bring it back to kind of where we were at the beginning, you don't have to live your life the way others expect. Something that I tried to mention, I think I said something about how I wrote this book because I want to help, individuals learn to live in this age of shifting power and money and such. And something I said in the book is that the systems of the world are designed for average people. And this is not a criticism of any individual. It's just a reflection. If you're designing a system, if you're like part of a corporation writing corporate policy, you have to write these policies for a lot of people. And so they have to be designed kind of for the lowest common denominator. And lots of systems in life are designed for lots of people. So if you follow these average systems, whether it's in personal finance, entrepreneurship, or anything else, then you're going to get average results, right? So if that's what you want, if you want average results, you follow an average plan. But for me, one of the things I feel most fortunate about is since I started my project and started talking with folks is I get to meet so many people who want more than average. And if you're here tonight, most likely you're in that group. And you say one way or another, I want more than average. I want something exceptional. Maybe I just want something different. And a lot of the people that I connect with, they either feel excluded in some way from traditional systems of power and money, or they want to exclude themselves. They want to kind of opt out and do something different for themselves. So if that is you tonight, then I think you are an inspiration to lots of people. You are an inspiration to me. And I hope that something in this book is helpful to you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I believe there's a process here for questions because we're doing the live stream. So if you have a question and you're able to stand, come on over here to the microphone, just so we can say hello to anybody else who's out there. Thank you, sir.
What do you think about the use of artificial intelligence to make money? And we've seen it, of course, with the actors' strike, books, screenplays, doctors, lawyers, and when you talk about power, maybe politics and military as well.
Sure. Great question, yeah. I think that's something that's on everyone's mind. So maybe a couple observations, like observation one, it's not going away, right? So I try to look at things the way they are, not necessarily the way we want them to be. It doesn't mean we can't create change, but I think that's something that's been helpful in my own life, completely apart from AI, is learning to just recognize, here's what's actually happening, not necessarily my projection or my vision of it. I think there are clearly ways that AI is being used for good, to say that as well. And like in the book, I have some examples of artists who are using AI to, they're still making art, but they're using it to accelerate processes that were taking a long time before. It could be many other examples as well. And then, of course, there are lots of concerns. And I think anybody who has no concerns about AI isn't paying attention either. And so for that, it's like, well, we're not going to probably solve every problem in the world about that, at least not in a short time with this group. For me, what I think about when I notice the anxiety that people feel over it, I just kind of bring it back to humanity and say, well, there's some things that AI is not going to replace, such as like what we're doing here tonight. If you are a creative or you want to make something, then you need to keep making. I mean, one of the ways we can, I don't want to say fight back, but one of the ways we can challenge like the dominance of an AI narrative is to continue making things ourselves. So that's all that I'm trying to do myself. But thank you for the question. Yes.
Thank you. I tried really hard to come up with a why question, but I couldn't do it. This one kept entering my mind. I'm not sure I fully understand the shift in power, so mostly I wanted you just to elaborate on that a little bit. For example, is this a shift from the top down, from the relatively few traditionally powerful institutions or people or whatever, down to more and more individuals that weren't part of that power system?
Yeah.
And then anyway, just further elaboration on who's getting more power and who's losing it.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I think that's kind of like the AI question. Also, it's pretty big. There's a lot of ways I could take it, right? But for me, something that I tried to notice a good bit and write about was this aspect of decentralization, and that there is more to go with that as well. But I guess when I started selling things online, this is like 25 years ago, eBay.com had just come out, and I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing. And like this is peak marketplace now because everything is for sale. But obviously that was like the early days. And to sell things online or to kind of build an independent business, you were still pretty reliant on various institutions and gatekeepers and such. I mean, you still needed to use like the Visa MasterCard network or PayPal or something, which could come along and take your funds for no reason, and which they did many times. Whereas now, that's not necessarily required. There are lots of other ways to do that. And I also said something about, like long ago, I said, on the internet, nobody cares if you're 16, right? You could start an online business and be a teenager. But that also wasn't completely true because of we still needed the institutions. You still needed access to things. You needed to have your parent or guardian or somebody kind of set you up. Whereas now, those barriers are much less. So in terms of the marketplace, that's one thing I'm writing about. But obviously, power has changed in lots of other ways as well. Let's take a few. Let's hear the next question, but we can come back and talk about it more.
Hey, Chris. Huge inspiration for travel from your before all this. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Wanted to ask. So you traveled to every country in the world. That was a huge goal. And then when that was over, what was that like having that huge goal be done? And how did it change your outlook on travel in general?
Yeah, I was super depressed afterwards. Absolutely, not even kidding. No, because and I wrote a book about this, not just about my quest, but like everybody who undertakes a quest, like just about everybody. I don't want to say it's universal, but like very common. You spend a lot of your time like working towards this thing, and it becomes part of your identity. And even if you say, well, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, like that's true. But still, like, there's this thing that you have been working toward. And I actually kind of sensed it going into it, like 3 to 6 months before the end of it. I was like, oh, I'm really happy and also sad, because what's next, right? And so I actually had kind of like a pretty profound, like, period of depression that followed it. And I think what I had to figure out was, like you need something to replace it, right? You need a new goal, you need a new thing. But I don't know that the new goal has to be the same kind of goal. That's what the natural inclination is, and that's what I've seen other people do who've like climbed the highest mountain or done something like that. They're like, okay, how do I go to the bottom of the ocean, or how do I whatever But it's not always. It's often something different. And so for me, I ended up focusing more on community and on the writing and doing some other kinds of things. So I was kind of sad when I accomplished it, but I'm still very glad I did. It's like both. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and it's also like comes with some like processing you have to do. And the other question was, how has travel kind of affected me now and such? Well, you guys have such big, broad questions. How has travel? I don't know. It kind of it informs how I see the world. It informs my interactions with people. As I said, I'm very grateful for the chance to have done it. I was talking with somebody who said tonight, you were talking about your wife who wants to go to every country in the world, and you were saying there's some places you wouldn't necessarily want to go, and for me, there's some places I wouldn't necessarily care to return to, but I'm still glad that I did that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great.
Hi, Chris. Longtime reader, and I'm delighted to be here to see the 18,000th book you've written. I have a question for you about community and how you balance all these decentralized, individualized phenomena with building community. And I guess my question really is, did you learn anything that surprised you about the potential for community in thinking about all this? A lot of people are really despairing about that, but I've noticed people are also hungry for community. And what do you? How did writing this book and observing all this? How did that change your thinking?
Yeah, this is great. I'm not sure I have a really good answer for you, but I like it.
I don't think anybody has a good answer.
I think
so-
what I realized, because I wasn't able to travel, I guess so many of us weren't able to travel and meet for so long. But in my case in particular, I'd been doing these book tours on a pretty regular basis, and I'd been doing the World Domination Summit, and having to take so much time off of that just really made me long much more, to be doing it again. And it's really interesting. Like I feel like maybe I'll probably have a better answer in like 2 weeks, when I won't see you. But after I've been doing this a little bit more, yeah, maybe, yeah, I probably will. Yeah, I mean, last week I started in Phoenix. I was like stop number 1, and I had a lot of feelings about it. It was kind of like coming to the end of the journey or whatever. It's like, okay, I used to do this a lot, and it's been a long time, and this is really special. And I miss this. So I kind of see it as a community as a compass point. And if you, or an anchor, perhaps some metaphor, and like the farther you get from it, the more you realize how important it is. And so if you're not sure what to do, I always say, like, if you're not sure what to do next, you can always think about, like, what can you make or create, and who can you help? Like, there's always somebody you can help in some small way. There's always something you can make or create in some small way. And so I think I had really gotten away from like just more of these like in-person gatherings, and I miss that. Thank you. Any other questions? Do maybe a couple more questions, okay? And then then I'm not going anywhere, but I want to respect your time, and I want to have time to talk with anybody who wants to talk individually as well. So maybe 2 more questions, yeah.
Yeah, hey. So first of all, I want to thank you. I followed your work for like 10 years. I was
Awesome.
at the summit in maybe 2014 when we did the yoga record.
Okay.
And the World Domination Summit,
That's
yeah,
right.
in Portland. And we made a record for yoga. What is it, Guinness Book or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, it was cool. Can
Do
read
you
all
know, by
about
the way,
it.
just a side note, so we set the Guinness World Record for like the most people doing sequential yoga poses, and we set that record with like 800 people or something, and India came along to break the record and did it with like 20,000 people after us. And we were like, okay, well, you can't do anything about that. Basically, they're going to own that record now.
That's great. So, yeah. So anyway, thank you for like I've learned a lot, from following you and meeting other authors or thinkers, like thinking outside the box from you, and travel hacking, lots of stuff. So my question is about, what do you think about the transition to so much remote work and post-pandemic? And you said some of these changes. You didn't mention that specifically, but I think it's related.
Yeah.
And, when you talked about, you think some of these changes may be, permanent or long-lasting or whatever. And we have forces now that are trying to, like, pull more people back to work. And then, of course, there's a social benefit of human interaction, but there's also the reality that so many jobs these days don't require an in-person presence. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, like, what your thoughts on that as they relate.
Yeah, well, that's a shift in power, actually. So to the question earlier about like more about the shift in power, I mean, remote work is a tremendous shift in power. And as you said, various workforces are, trying to like drag people back. And in some cases that's successful, and in other cases there's great resistance. And a lot of people who are not in roles that actually do require them to truly be, on site, a lot of them have chosen to opt out or to look for other employment or to do something different. So yes, I mean, no doubt there's a social benefit in some ways, but but remote workers can find other social benefits. And I think a lot of people have really chosen to reprioritize some values. And this isn't like not for everyone, of course, but a lot of people have said, wow, my freedom and my control of my own schedule, that is much more important to me than almost anything else, right? They're willing to prioritize that over some other benefit. And I think for a long, like some people did that before too, but now it's much more accessible, and they know more people that are doing it. So I don't think that's going to change. I think there will continue to be like pull and push, but I mean, obviously remote work is not going to go anywhere. I think to your point also about how there were a lot of professions and companies that thought it was impossible, to do remote work, and clearly discovered actually it's quite possible. So that's why office buildings are empty, and in New York and every other city. So, yeah. All right. One more question. Anybody has one final question?
Will you do World Domination Summit again?
Will I do WDS again? Thank you for the question. Yeah, well, we had the 10-year anniversary. It was 10-year anniversary at year 12 because of losing 2 years. Listen, I loved everything about WDS. I still love it. I would do WDS every month if I could. So we'll see. We'll see. That's a great question, though. Thank you so much. Somebody from Politics and Prose, is Olivia here? Anyone else? Yeah. I want to have you come back up. Oh, also, if you, so I'd love to see you before you go. If you have a moment, I have a little bookmark for you and a postcard, if you're having your book signed, so we can talk. But you all have been a wonderful audience. Thank you for being here. Olivia?